Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and today we have a delightful guest, Richard Marker. He's the founder and co-principal of Wise Philanthropy. We're going to have a great discussion today about best practices for philanthropy, so stay tuned.
Welcome to Your Mark on the World, bringing you another changemaker with champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
This episode is made possible via the support of our sponsors, including Johnson & Johnson's Caring Crowd.
Richard, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. We're thrilled to have you, and thank you for making the time for us. Give us the Wise Philanthropy elevator pitch.
An elevator pitch, sure. We do three things, and we try to do them well. We advise, teach and teach philanthropists and foundation people, and those who work with them. So that's probably the quickest way to do it. I can tell you more details if you wish, but that I think gives you a start.
Great. So you've been doing this for a while now, right?
I would say about a quarter century.
Yes.
As it happens, it's my fifth career, but it's what I've been doing for the longest.
Yeah. So you're a serious expert about philanthropy. You travel around, you speak often, and attend a lot of conferences. What do you see as being the biggest trends in the world of philanthropy right now?
The biggest trends. It's a question that's always asked. So I always like to caution in saying that is that there's the trends that you see that are written about, and the real question is how many people are actually doing it. So, and you know, you've been around a lot for a long time too, and so one has to be very cautious before you talk about something that gets headlines in the paper as the trend. I will say, however, that there are certain trends that have already stood the test of time, and I think it's important to talk about those. And the trend that's defining philanthropy, and I think largely around the world, but certainly in the United States, is that people want to know that there's some sort of relationship between where their money is going and something's happening with that money. Very few people just want to give because an institution in their neighborhood or has a claim on them. But rather they say, if I'm going to put money in, whether it's going to be my philanthropic money or my investment money, I want to know that there's a change that takes place because of that. Probably the most pervasive summary trend that you would talk about.
So as you talk about that, are you thinking that people are more interested in the impact, the outcomes, the results, or are you suggesting that people are more interested in the transparency required to know how their money is spent, or both of those things?
All of that, all of the above. All of the above. And the other thing, I would add one more thing to the mix, although this is really an area that's a trend. It's an important trend. I'm not sure what the statistics are. And that is people are using a wide variety of vehicles, not strictly traditional grant-making, charitable giving philanthropic vehicles, but people are using advocacy. People are using impact investing through other pockets. As a way to somehow bring about change using the most effective arrow in the quiver, shall we say. In terms of what you're talking about in terms of transparency, and that has a lot to do with whose money is it? And that's an important discussion. It's an important discussion probably more within the field than it is outside the field.
It is has the potential to really change things. I tend to think of Silicon Valley as having driven this change on the side of transparency and accountability and outcomes, kind of a goal toward measurement, something akin to what they've been doing in their businesses. And as they become wealthy, and you think of Pierre Omidyar and now Mark Zuckerberg a little bit. Is that where you see the origins, or did you see the origins before those guys?
Actually, in fairness, people started asking those questions before those guys made their first billion. Now, of course, you're quite correct that those are guys who are using different vehicles to get at that. Both of the two people you mentioned are not restricting their impact on their goal for impact using traditional philanthropy foundation structures. They're using LLCs and trying to use a variety of other vehicles. So that, in that sense, you're correct to point to them. But the issue of looking for bang for the buck and impact, that actually goes back before then. People began, and this is a much longer discussion than we even have time for today. It has a lot to do with changes in the society. The concept of noblesse oblige, the concept of built-in loyalty just because you happen to be somewhere, that eroded a generation ago. And people began to say, wait a second, don't tell me that you want to, that you're raising money to eradicate illiteracy. And you do it every year and you make the same claim. I want to know that you're eradicating illiteracy. And people were asking those kinds of questions going back a quarter of a century. The Robin Hood Foundation, which is about 26 years old or something like that now, was one of in the forefront. Even United Way, you know, stodgy old United Way, going back even longer ago than that, changed the way it kept track of its data from what we might call the turnstile style of record keeping to what was the change that took place because of their grant making. So this is something that has gone further. It goes back further, but of course, the more visibility of the Silicon Valley funders, and frankly, the amount of new money that they have to put on the table gives it much more attention.
So you're just such an expert. I want to. There are 1,000 questions I want to ask you. We'll try to get through 2 or 3 more.
But you know, it's our first discussion. We can pick this up another time too.
Yeah, we will need to do that, Richard. We'll need to do that. What is the advice you give to relatively new philanthropists when you sit down with either a group of them as a speaker or as in a one-on-one as a consultant? How do you spool people up to be effective philanthropists?
Well, and by the way, so there's a couple things. The first thing is my whole strategy approach actually turns the classic model upside down. If you've ever gone, as most people who are listening to this call have done, they've probably gone through some sort of strategic planning process where the consultant says, let's come up with a mission statement or vision statement right at the beginning. I don't think that's the most efficient way to start. I think it's important, but I do that at the end. I think it's much more important to get your arms around what I would call culture. What are the ways in which you do it? What are the ways in which you're going to feel gratified to do it? How hands-on do you want to be? How much recognition do you need? How long do you want this process to go on? And I'm just giving a couple of examples of that. Frankly, when people sit down to make decisions, those are the make or break decisions as to how their philanthropy works. The second thing I tell people is, don't be afraid to set aside the first 3 years as a learning experience. Don't be so quick to make decisions that are going to bind you for a long time. Take 2 or 3 years and do whatever comes along that you're interested in. And then after 2 or 3 years, sit back and go through the process again and say, what worked for us? What didn't work for us? What were we surprised about? What turned out to be a surprise on the negative side, and what was a surprise on the positive side? What are the ways in which we can kind of limit what we do so that we've learned from those 3 years to do it better? Those are some of just a few things that I try to tell people so that there's a comfort level. You'd be amazed how many people feel that they have to start out having every question answered at the beginning. And when I tell them that, they take a deep breath. Or they let the breath out, I guess I should say. And they said, that's so liberating because I was so afraid that we were going to make a mistake. Well, the truth is there's lots of legitimate needs out there, and the likelihood is you're not going to waste your money. You just may not feel at the end of the day that that's the best place you want to do it. Now, depending on what people have to do and how many people are involved and how many generations are involved, there's lots and lots of other things that we do along the process. But I would say that those 2 key things are often ways that get people started in a way that gives them a comfort level and a way to get started that gives them their own self-knowledge to be able to go be good funders and philanthropists down the road.
Let's flip the coin for just a minute, Richard. When you think about philanthropy, most of your work is for philanthropists, but the whole process is around their giving to causes, to organizations who are out there. So now think about how you would advise a nonprofit to approach a philanthropist. What are the keys to a successful pitch in 2018?
Well, there's some things that are not just 2018. But the first thing I would say is be careful when you read all the fundraising books that tell you that it's all about relationship. Relationship only works if you have a common interest. Just because you want to take somebody to have a cup of coffee is not going to get you a grant. Relationship is built on knowing that there's a common interest, and there's ways of finding that out by looking at the 990 PFs that are available in GuideStar or some other kinds of vehicles, the Foundation Center. There's all sorts of ways in which at least established foundations you can get that information very readily. If there's no common interest, don't waste your time and don't waste anybody else's time. That's the first thing. Second thing is be as honest as you can. Don't try to second guess the process. Everybody who does funding knows that every grant that we make is a bet into something that's in the future. There is no guarantee in this future. So to tell us that you're the first person that ever did something, or that you're the very best that ever existed, or this is a fail-safe kind of thing that evidence proves, all of us know better. We know that there's plenty of people doing things. That doesn't mean you can't be as good as the best, but to somehow say that nobody else is doing it, or to say that this is a guaranteed success. We want to know that somebody has enough self-reflection that they're putting their request in a context. We know what these challenges that they're facing and what they hope are going to be the results of it. Some of those results may be quantifiable. Some of those results may be community change, but we want there to be a level of honesty on the funding side, on the expectation side, and the context side. And that's taken very seriously by funders when it goes ahead. Nobody can guarantee you that money, but you can't imagine how few people go through that process.
Well, that's great, powerful advice. Richard, you have been at this for 25 years. You've had a long career. What is the most important lesson you've learned over that career?
Be humble. I would say that we are responsible, those of us on the giving side, no matter what hat we're wearing, and I used to head a big foundation and I teach funders. I've taught a couple thousand, hundreds and hundreds of funders from a lot of countries and in a lot of countries. The truth of the matter is that we are responsible for billions of dollars. We're responsible for an entire sector, and very often we're responsible for public policy. And the minute that we have let hubris take over, but we don't know everything. And if we can't acknowledge that we can be wrong and honor that other people have something to bring to the table, we lose something. No, that doesn't exempt us from knowing things. But to think that we know it all, no matter how much money we have, is a guarantee of our own failure.
Richard, you are certainly a bright, capable person. You told me as we were starting that you have had 5 different careers. You could be doing a lot of different things, but you've devoted the last 25 years to philanthropy. Why? Why have you done that when you could do anything?
Well, you can only do anything at the time that you're prepared to do it. But look, what I said before is very real. We matter, and we can matter. And the reason I do the kind of education that I do, and I do it at 2 universities, as you know, both at the University of Pennsylvania and at NYU, and we have our own educational division called the Wise Philanthropy Institute, is because I want us to do it right. I want us to do it with credibility. I want us to do it with responsibility. I've developed a term called philanthroethics, where everything we do should be looked at in the guise of our own best behavior. We talked about transparency, an understanding of what of the power that we have and how we use that power and don't abuse that power. How our own questions, our very questions, can change the way nonprofits go about their business. We have a tremendous ability to bring about change in the world. And if I can help through our own funding, limited funding that may be, and through teaching funders and advising funders, if we can make sure that we're making good and wise decisions, we can bring about changes that can have long-lasting impact for the communities in which we live, for the institutions we may choose to support on the national level, and in many cases on the international level, that go way beyond the scope of our and the limits of our own funding.
Fascinating, fascinating. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, Richard, what is your superpower?
My superpower, it's interesting. Late in life, well, let's go back a step. One of the things that I did, because I started as an academic, I had other careers, and therefore public speaking was something that was part of what I did. But I never knew that that was something I could do better than I used to do it. It wasn't bad. Once I learned that that was a skill that can really make a difference, it was a skill that I took very seriously. Because words matter. How you say words matter. What you write matters. And so and once I learned that that was a competence and a skill that I had, I took very seriously that that's something it's an important skill to cultivate because over time you learn that people listen and they want to listen and they want to learn. And so if there's a superpower, it's that I take words and the expression of words as something that can be a tremendously positive influence if done properly.
I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I appreciate those insights. I certainly share your belief that words have power and we can use them to that effect. I wish I had your superpower for effectiveness in that regard. Before you go, Richard, will you take just a minute to tell people how they can learn more about Wise Philanthropy and how they can connect with you personally?
Pretty straightforward. Since you've mentioned Wise Philanthropy, wisephilanthropy.com. Couldn't be easier. Wisephilanthropy.com. And if you want to reach me, marker@wisephilanthropy.com. Pretty straightforward to do. We're pretty consistent.
Great. Well, Richard, we do appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we wish you every success in improving the effectiveness of philanthropists around the world.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and I look forward to continuing our discussion in the future.
As do I. Now, let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is available at youtube.com/Devin Thorpe. Subscribe to this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes by searching for Your Mark on the World. Every weekday, Devin hosts a CEO, celebrity, entrepreneur, or other changemaker here on the Your Mark on the World show to inspire and prepare you to make your mark. Devin is a champion of social good, writing about, advocating for, and advising people who are doing good. He is a Forbes contributor who is a recognized thought leader in social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and crowdfunding. To book Devin as a speaker, visit devinthorpe.com.